You had a story about a Ouija board that tied in your
Ah.
recovery somehow.
You sure you want to do that one?
Yeah, let's
That's a
do that.
weird. That's a weird one, Patrick.
The weirder the better in my experience.
Okay. This is back in the last century. My wife refers to those days for me as metaphysical man. It was the New Age was the thing, and I'd done a lot of past life regression work on myself, and I'd become a past life therapist. That's sort of the context. But
But by most definitions, secular, right? So that's what's kind of interesting to
oh
me is that
yeah,
there's the mysticism, but then there's also the secularism.
there's a difference between spiritual and psychic. Psychic's kind of between us as human beings on the horizontal plane. That spiritual is the vertical. All of that exploration did involve a very strong spiritual component, including this story with the Ouija board. But it's not religious in any sense of the word. I grew up Presbyterian in West Texas, which I can quote the catechism for the Presbyterian Church in West Texas, which is God is love, and the Cowboys play at 12:30. So we had to get out of church and get home, including the pastor.
Makes sense.
As the story goes, I was messing around with the Ouija board. This is a story about how the addict's mind and how specifically the denial system of alcoholism works. Because I'm still all the other things I'm talking about. I'm also still a drinking alcoholic at this time. So I can't remember what we were actually even talking about. I was asking about on the Ouija board. But all of a sudden, to some question I had asked, it responded, "Fix you first." F-I-X, and then the letter U, and then F-I-R-S-T, fix you first. It scared me. I immediately kind of thought I knew what it was talking about, because was always trying to avoid the topic of my alcoholism. Let's ask something else. And then the Ouija board thing says, resist poison. I didn't like that either, but I was asking questions in such a general way at that point because I didn't want to, and there were some other people in the room as well. I didn't want other people to know what I was talking about, because I was trying to get so I was actually trying to change the subject with the Ouija board. I was, I've written it all down. I wrote it down immediately after in my journal, so we could go back and actually check this, because I knew it was so weird. I was going to have to write it down because I wouldn't believe it later. But ultimately, I asked if I knew this entity, this being, and it said yes immediately. And I all of a sudden, just intuitively, I understood it was my grandfather, that my paternal grandfather, who had lived with us until all my life, until when he died when I was 17. And I asked him, and I asked, is that who he was? And he said yes. And I said, did you have this problem? And he immediately said yes. There's a little yes on the Ouija board. It just goes up to yes. The interesting thing to me about that is I'd never seen in all the 17 years I lived with him, I never heard anybody say anything about alcohol with him. I never saw him take a drink. I never heard anybody mention any of that kind of stuff. But for some reason I asked that question. And so I got that. It was like, fix you first, meaning take care of my own stuff before I'm helping other people, while I'm helping other people. The others resist poison, which obviously meant to get sober. And then he identified who he was and said that basically it was like a psychic 12-step call. It's like he was there to do that. And so here's the part of the story I told you. Immediately after that experience, I can honestly tell you with absolute honesty that I abstained from the Ouija board. From the Ouija, it's like I never paused for a second with drinking. I was probably drinking at the time and just kept drinking, but I never went back to the Ouija board. And the reason I was telling you that story was because that, to me, that's the extent to which the denial system, the good lawyer of the addiction, will go to in our own minds to to maintain our right to keep drinking.
Yeah.
It was like, that was such a direct thing. It was such a powerful thing. It was such a weird thing. And it never occurred to me one time that I never even went into a dilemma about whether I should stop drinking or not.
But you stayed the hell away from that Ouija board.
I haven't touched a Ouija board since.
and so at the time that you did find recovery by some other means,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
You probably returned to the memory of the Ouija board, and that was kind of a foundational moment in getting to where you got.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of you go back a long way when you look. Most people who may not have Ouija board stories, but when you get sober, you look back and realize there were some people along the way that really tried to help. And you do go back and you hopefully go back and thank them and make amends to them for ignoring what they had to say. Several years into my recovery, maybe 2 or 3 years into my recovery, and I was visiting with my parents. And I said, "Is there any history of alcoholism in our family?" And they both simultaneously said, "Yeah, your grandfather." Meaning we called him Poppy. And of course, like I said, I'd never heard anybody mention alcohol with him that I know of, that I remember. I mean, some skeptic can say, oh, you probably did, but you just was unconscious. But they told me the story of his drinking, and he was my father's dad, and my dad. It turns out I knew my dad had a tough life growing up, but he was a horribly abusive alcoholic. Just it was a terrible story, and it's like, and he had quit drinking, but it was just the weirdest. I didn't tell them about the Ouija board. But I was amazed when immediately when I asked the question, was there a history? It was Poppy. I don't know if there's a moral to that story or if that's just fun to talk about because it's weird.
Well, my interpretation of it is that even by the most skeptical interpretation of the Ouija board and what was being transacted there, you were getting input that the way that you were living your life was leading you to some form of ruin. And
Mm-hmm.
you put that input aside until a later moment when you were ready to hear what the message was, and then the next chapter began.
When you said even at the most skeptical view of that, which really would be that even if that's just my unconscious mind, I all these years later, I swear to you, it never occurred to me. Even if that's just my unconscious mind, my recovery self trying to get through to me at that point, the story is valid. It's like something, whether it came from inside of me or outside of me, was trying to get my attention. It was saying, "Fix you first," which is which was a reference to what I did for a living, because I was an alcoholism counselor, and resist poison, which was about the abstinence of that. It's a story of it's that part trying to reach out and how powerful the denial system is.